to install the auto process, we started from the root directory of TA100 Pro. We'll go ahead and double-click the link here where it says Install Auto Process. That is actually step 1. So I'll go ahead and double-click that. What you should have seen was just a black window that popped up, kind of like an old DOS prompt window. Again, because we are using GoToMeeting, it happens so fast, you guys may actually have not have seen it if you just looked away for a moment, because it really does happen very fast. So that was step 1. Step 2, we actually have to create what we call an auto process service. So just to let you know, it has not been created. If I go back to communications down to auto process, you'll notice the auto process service has not been created. So that's actually step 2, is to create that service. In order to do that, we'll go back into the root folder, and where it says autoprocess.exe, I'll double-click that, and what you should see is basically a white screen, and then in the top right corner, it should say nothing to process. So here we go. Perfect. That was step 2. Now step 3. Step 3 is the step that must be performed back inside of TA100 Pro. So once back inside TA100 Pro, we'll go to Communications, down to Auto Process, and notice now we do have the Auto Process service. So again, this is what we created when we completed step 2. In this auto process service, this is where I'm going to add anything that I want to have automated within the software, because everything that I want to have automated has to be within this particular service. So here, the auto process service 1000 has been created. We're actually going to click Edit, and this is where we will add anything to this auto process service. I'll click Add here. And in this case, I want to automate a polling process. But notice, polling is not the only item that can be automated in the system. Again, you can see poll clocks here, but there are several other options. I mentioned yesterday reports. You can actually have reports automated. Now, not every report that we offer in the system is a report, of course, that can be automated. Again, you can see the list of reports. But certainly there are quite a few. Also, running a file. If there is a specific file that you need to have executed at a specific time, again, you can actually make that happen here. Re-indexing, you can go ahead and re-index on an automated basis as well as backup. But do know they're actually going into the default, which is basically the backup folder or the re-index folder that is connected to TA100 Pro. But again, our goal right now is to do a poll. So once we've activated poll clocks, our polling options still have to be defined, and all of these items should look familiar. These are the same items that we discussed on yesterday. So again, we'll do a poll clear. We will do load messages, process punches, and then if we have hand readers, we'll go ahead and do a retrieve. I'll click OK here. And then to the right side, if there is a specific time I want to accept, I can actually indicate a specific time, but I like to typically keep this at midnight, and then I like to do a replicate feature, so you'll see that in just a moment. Here, I'll go ahead and tag all of the clocks. I'll click OK here. And then in the bottom right corner where it says replicate, this is actually where I can set up how often I want this system or the clocks to poll with the software. So if I want to have it done every 2 hours, every 4 hours, I can make that happen here. So in this case, let's say it's going to happen every 2 hours. Click OK there, and it automatically puts it in place here. So it really is a great feature versus me having to go in and set all of those up, one for 2 a.m., one for 4 a.m., one for 6 a.m. I don't have to do those individually. I can just replicate from the original. Okay. Once you have created exactly what you want to have auto-processed, you can go ahead and close here. Close here. We'll return back to TA100 Pro. And step 4, the last step in the process, is actually where you activate, meaning you turn on the auto process. So here, it says auto process service setup. I'll go ahead and double click that item. And all I have to do here is click start. So we'll click start here. And in just a moment, it should turn into red for stop, unless I have some other things actually running here. So let me just make sure I don't have anything else running. We'll try that again. There we are. So again, I know I typically have a lot of things, and I know the last training that I did was certainly Gen Pro, so I probably still have that one running. So again, once I stop that, started the TA100 Pro auto process, notice how it automatically moves to the red stop. That lets me know that the process has indeed started. Any questions about this process? All right. Now again, I am going to stop this process, and we'll go ahead and close here. Also go ahead and close my root folder, and I'll bring us back into TA100 Pro. So remember, this process does actually take place again starting in the root folder. So you must go back to that original folder where TA100 Pro was installed. So it looks like we are ready to officially start part 2. And part 2, we are truly switching gears because basically everything that I shared with you on yesterday was looking at the software from an administrative perspective, how to set up the system, how to get it ready and working for your client. Well, now that you've done that, it's time to show your client how to use the software. So one of the first things that we want to do in the software today is head over to Daily Operations, and we're going to walk you through actually adding a new employee into the software. So under Daily Operations, we're headed into the Employee section. In the Employee section, I always like to say this area is actually divided into 2 windows. You have a left side, and of course you have the right side. The left side of the window is literally going to be a list of all of your employees. So if you have an employee highlighted, you'll be able to see all of the details of that employee in the top left corner. Here, the filter, you do have an opportunity to use a filter based on what you may have selected to use in the system. For example, if you're using divisions, if you're using groups, certainly you can filter employees according to those items. If you're going to label employees salary versus hourly, full-time versus part-time, permanent versus temporary, those are also filters that you can use in the system. Here, let's say we activate division and group. When you activate those filters, they do appear here. If you click the drop-down, you can see all of the divisions that we created. And, of course, if you have employees associated with those divisions, you can make that selection. For groups, you can see a list of all of the groups that we created. And, of course, if you have employees associated with different groups, you can focus on those particular groups. Here, prior, find, and next. Again, just another way to manipulate the list. Notice prior is not available because we're already at the top of the list with Carol, and there are no employees in front of Carol. But if I click next, it will allow me to go to the next employee, which is Peter Bain. Find. Now, right now, of course, we only have 5 employees listed in the window. So find is not that big of a deal here because I can literally click any one of these employees on initial view. But if I had a very long list, let's say maybe I had 100 employees, and I want to know or I want to go to a specific employee, as long as I know that employee's number, which is referred to as code here, or if you want to key in their last name, or if you know their badge number, you could locate that employee. So here, let's say we wanted to go to Smith. Notice immediately the system brought me to John Smith. because right now he's the only Smith. If there were multiple Smiths, it just would have brought me to the first Smith in the list. To the bottom left corner here, you have number versus name. This is simply defining how this list is in a sort order. Right now it is according to employee number, but we could switch it over to name and it becomes alpha order. So remember, it's all about the end user who's using the software. How would they prefer to see this information? So show inactive. Remember, and I think I mentioned it yesterday, we do not recommend that you delete employees out of the system. What we do recommend is that you simply make them inactive. Once you have made employees inactive, you will be able to include those employees as a part of this list simply by checking the box here. In just a little bit, I will be sharing with you how to make an employee inactive. As always, the change the width of the data list. We talked about this one yesterday. We can expand it or we can decrease it depending on, again, how many characters. If you have employees with very long names, then certainly you may want to increase or change the size of the data field. Now, the left side, or shall I say the right side of the screen, is completely built differently because it's all based on the actual tab that you're working with. What we're going to do is we're actually going to start on the Detail tab, and we'll work our way back across. But we are going to go ahead and add a new employee into the system. By adding a new employee into the software, it allows us to walk you through all of the possible screens that you ultimately need to access. At the bottom, we'll click Add here. For the number, I'm actually just going to go ahead and make this employee number 6. Notice the only mandatory item in this area is indeed the employee number. The social, the birth date, the last name, the first name, believe it or not, those are not mandatory fields. But the employee number is a mandatory field. If I don't have an employee number, it will not allow me to click or go anywhere else I may need to go, not until I populate that employee number. Here, if I just key in 6 and I tab out of it, because the employee number is listed as a numeric field and not an alphanumeric field, it will automatically zero fill for me. And the socials, the birth date's not going to worry about that. But for the first name, I am going to make that Joe, and the last name will make that Sample. Not going to worry about a middle initial, address, city, zip, state, phone, or email. But I do want to include a hire date. Remember, although the system says hire dates are not officially mandatory, you may want to think about other things that you are using in the software, such as holiday rules. If you have holiday rules that indicate you have to be with the company 30 days, 45 days, 60 days, then definitely you want to make sure that your hire dates are correct because it's basing that time frame from the hire date. Or if they have decided to use benefit accruals and they have benefit accruals that are resetting based on the hire date, again, you want to be certain that your hire dates are indeed correct. So here, we're going to say that this employee actually hired on June 29th, accrued this month. If we have any benefits that actually were set to start to accrue on a monthly basis, I can actually check this box, and it will allow them to start in the month of June. Now, some companies do this a little different. Some companies will say, well, depending on when you started in the month, and that is if they are using some type of monthly accrual, depending on when you started in the month. If you started the 1st through the 15th, then yes, we will allow it to accrue this month. But if you started the 16th sometime to the end of the month, then no, we will not allow it to accrue starting this month. So it's just all about what their company policy may be. The fiscal field, remember I told you yesterday when we were working with the benefits, I told you every employee will have 2 dates. They will have their official hire date, and they will also have that fiscal date. Here's where the fiscal date is listed. In our case, because the benefits that we created on yesterday did not have a reset using that fiscal field, then we're just going to keep it the same as the hire date. The software also offers what we call an alternate hire date. An alternate hire date specifically being used for benefits, that is. In the software, let's say maybe you have an employee who left the company a few months ago, and now that person has returned. But the deal or the negotiation for that person to return is that they would still pick up their same benefits, because maybe they have been with the company 10 years. So they would still resume their same benefit rates, and all of that actually remains the same. Well, that's where you want to give that employee an alternate hire date. Again, in order some fields that we could have manipulated from yesterday. And on yesterday, we only decided to use one custom field, and that is the 911 number. In this window, certainly if we have a phone number, we can include it. We did not address the other 5 custom fields, so that is simply why you have no label connected to these particular items, such as we have the 911 label here. But remember, this is always something your client can go back and add at any time. In the division area, here is where we are assigning the employee to the division. You may remember divisions were things that we looked at early on yesterday. So here we'll go ahead and assign this employee to the Arizona division. The groups, the security groups. Here is where we'll find a list of the groups. So what security groups should this employee be associated with? We'll go ahead and make that training. And then for the holidays, if you recall from yesterday when we added holidays in the software, there were 2 groups that we officially created. And I told you then that you can't label the groups, so you have to know which group is which. Yesterday, I think we used Group 1 as the 24/7 group, and Group 2 was actually the Monday through Friday. So here, we'll go ahead and assign this employee to Group 2. Now, granted, if you're working with a client and the client had told you, well, all of our employees observe the same days, then certainly at this juncture you could just use all holidays if they had not decided to separate out by group. The accrual rule, there was only one accrual rule we worked with yesterday, so we'll go ahead and assign that to Joe Sample here. The use of the PC clock. Remember when I shared the PC clock with you on yesterday? I told you then I did not think I had any employees that were officially associated to use the PC clock. Well, this is what I was referring to. In order to use the PC clock, an employee basically has to be granted permission to use the PC clock, and this is where we give an employee permission. The comments button. The comments link is simply a free type window where you can type any comments about an employee you desire. So if we want to say great employee, again, we could certainly say that. In the bottom left corner where it says Insert Note, if you click Insert Note, it gives you the date, the time, and the person who created this note. If that's too much information, you can just insert the date, and it just gives you the date. This information can also be forwarded to the clipboard, meaning you can paste it to the clipboard, and then from the clipboard you can send it wherever. So maybe if you wanted to create a Word file with all of this information, you could certainly do so. Print. You can actually print directly from this window as well. So all of that is a possibility. At the bottom, we'll go ahead and click OK here. And remember, adding a new employee is almost like a wizard. Not quite exactly a wizard because it doesn't contain the next, but it does bring up the screens that you definitely need to address. So here, the status is the next tab. And the status area, this is where we are confirming what policy this employee is associated with, and some other important labels, such as full-time versus part-time, permanent versus temporary. Notice the date column. The date column here is actually being pulled directly from the hire date that we connected to this employee. So that is indeed where the date is being pulled from. Now, what I like to tell end users is the first time around when you open the status window or when you're adding a new employee, you are simply going to use edit. You want to use edit to make sure that everything is correct for this employee. You don't want to use add. You just want to use edit. You're updating everything that first time around. So in this case, let's say maybe this employee is a temporary employee. But again, he is full-time. The policy, everything there is still correct. Here I can click OK. And everything is as it should be. Now, that's what we do in the beginning. So in the beginning, we only edit information to set it correct. After that, we never use edit again. Anything else that should change for Joe Sample, be it 1 month later, be it 6 months later, be it a year later, be it 5 years later, everything after that is then officially going to be an add. It is an add because we want to associate a date with it. Did you notice when we were in edit mode, you could not control the date? And that's why we call it edit, because I'm just updating any of that old or original information. But anything out of that that changes going forward, that is going to be an add. So it could be maybe as of August 19th. This employee, which are already temporary, but maybe they're going to become part-time. That's an addition. Notice what happens when I add an addition. It actually gives me a new row along with that date. So it allows us to see history as something has occurred for an employee. So I know that as of August 19th, this employee turned into a part-time employee. Or I could say, what about as of November 24th? Maybe this employee is also now an inactive employee. All of that is a part of the history. So I'm continuously building history for this employee. And that's the goal of why we only do edit the initial time around. But any time after that, it is always going back to add. We are adding new information into the window. Here, I'll just go ahead and delete these items. Any questions about the status area? So remember, the status area is definitely where we make an employee inactive. At the bottom, we'll click Close here, and we're headed into the assignment start date. In the assignment start date, this is all about our schedules now. So remember, we had the scheduling conversation yesterday that if you're planning to use rounding rules, any type of auto deductions, differentials, employees must be associated with a schedule. Well, this window is saying, well, when should I start the schedule for this particular employee? I'm going to give you two scenarios. The first scenario is when you're first starting with a company, meaning that the company has decided to use TA100 Pro, and now we're bringing all of the employees on board. Well, we typically don't want to go back to the hire date for those existing employees. We want to create what I call or refer to as a trigger date. It's the trigger date that I'm going to start all of the schedules from. It's the trigger date that I'm going to start all of the wages from. Now, how do I come up with a trigger date? My first question to the client could be, well, when are you planning to go live? So if the client said, well, oh, you know, we're looking to go live at our next pay period. Maybe their next pay period is actually going to start July 19th. So then I'll further say, well, are you planning to do any type of parallel where you want to test the system? Oh, yeah, maybe we want to do that next week, or this week we want to start something. So immediately, I want to use a trigger date that starts immediately. So if they're just planning to play with the system, to test the system, anything like that, we want to make sure that the schedules are all in place, that the rates of pay are all in place. So when they begin to run those reports, that they will see all of that valid information. So again, that's how you do existing employees. You would use other and then put in the official date that you're starting the schedules, as well as you can use that same date when you get to the wages area. Now, once all of the existing employees are all taken care of, then it becomes time where they have to add new employees. The company doesn't stop hiring new employees just because they have a new time and attendance software. Well, once they decide to go live, so if they did decide to go live maybe on the 19th, anytime after the 19th when they hire an employee, they're simply going to use the hire date at that juncture. Because remember, TA100 Pro is already in place. We didn't use the hire date for the existing employees because all of the existing employees were not using TA100 Pro. In other words, the system was not installed when those employees were hired. So that's why we had to use a trigger date. But now that the system is in place and we have new hires, certainly they can be brought on board using their hire date for scheduling purposes. In this case today, we are definitely going to use the hire date because we're going under the scenario that the software was already in place. Here we'll click Continue, and it brings us into a scheduling window. In the scheduling window, think of this as a foundation, because the goal here, if I can set up this 7-day block of time, basically 1 week, if I can set up this block of time, it will automatically continue to roll over week after week after week. Now granted, some environments love this particular scenario because you assign an employee to the schedule and they never change. Now some companies are completely different. Employees do change schedules every week. Well again, are they changing the start and stop time, or are they just changing the days of the week? If they're just changing the we always want to start on Sunday. And even though, let's say the company that you're working with, maybe their payroll cycle is a Wednesday through Tuesday cycle, it does not matter. This window will always come across as Sunday through Saturday, because this window is based on a standard calendar view. Most calendars that you work with start on Sunday, they end on Saturday. Same rules apply here. So again, it has absolutely nothing to do with their payroll cycles. So as always, though, we do start with Sunday. And I say start with Sunday because it is the first day of the week, and this is where we are defining the shift. Now, most people will be quick to tell you, well, none of our employees work on Sunday. When we haven't defined what days they work on, we're only associating the shift, and every day should have a shift. So on Sunday, if we click the drop down, we should find one of these shift groups that looks a tad familiar, and that is our training shift group. Remember, these are the shifts that we created yesterday. So for training today, I'm actually going to assign Joe Sample to the 7 to 4 shift. The department, let's go ahead and assign him to the training department, and for the job, we'll make it TA100 Pro. Now the good news about the things that I've just created here, I can use the double arrows pointing to the right, and it will take all of that information and copy it forward. Because remember, my goal is to create 7 days of true information. So now all of these days have a shift, all of these days have a department, and all of these days have a job. The next thing that I want to do is to define the days that this employee officially works. Here I'm just going to say that this employee actually works Monday through Friday. It's just that simple. Now, the bar that you see across here, this is what we refer to as a shift override. because you can use the bar to set the time, as well as you can just key it in here. But initially, when you create what I call the foundation, we don't want to use override. I'll go back in just a little bit once we've created the foundation, and then I'll share with you how to use a shift override. But in the meantime, we have a shift, we have a department, we have a job, and we've associated this employee to the days that they officially work. So basically, this 7-day window, this 7-day block of time, will automatically roll over week after week after week. Now visually, you will be able to see it for 90 days or 3 months, but it's a rolling 90-day period. So as 1 week rolls out, a new week rolls in. So I know most people say, well, oh, it's only 90 days. What happens after that? Well, there is no after that because it's a rolling 3-month period. At the bottom, we'll click OK here, and that brings us into the message assignment. In the message assignments window, I mentioned messages yesterday because when we were looking at the polling, it said load messages. And I explained to you then that those messages were considered to be personal messages. Prime example, when an employee goes to the clock and they swipe the clock, what message would you want them to see? I typically promote the employee's name. It almost serves as a confirmation that that employee is actually using the right badge, or they keyed in the right number. Here, I can do all clocks all at once. I can check the box that says use the default message, click OK, and notice it puts in first name, or actually it's reversed it here, Joe, or S and then Joe. Or maybe that was my doing. I must have put in the name reversed. Again, if I want to edit one of those, maybe at the PC clock, I don't want him to see that. Maybe I want him to see something different, his full name. Then I can make that happen. So you can edit individual clocks, or even if you wanted to, let's say you wanted to put your own message here and make it happy birthday. You could do that as well, because maybe Joe is getting ready to celebrate a birthday. All of that is a possibility. Remember, though, this is only where we add the messages into the system. For this message to be uploaded to the clock, remember that's a part of the polling. You have to poll the clock, and then in the polling process, you have to activate the box that says load messages. These are the personal messages that we are referring to. If you change the message here and you never communicate with the clock, do not expect that employee to see the message in the clock. At the bottom, we'll go ahead and click Close. And now for the wages. Remember, I think I mentioned yesterday, wages are not mandatory in the software, but certainly if your client wants to include wages, that's an excellent source for reports. In the wage window, there is a left side and a right side. Let's start with the right side. The right side represents salary employees. So this is why I'll say you want to confirm the expectation. If the client has definitely said we're going to include salary employees, then what's the expectation? Are we expecting them to clock, not to clock? We want to see the hours just automatically drop in place, 40 hours every week. What is the expectation? Here, report hours from. If we actually anticipate that salary employees will be clocking, you can say actual. Actual meaning actual punch hours. Or I could tell the system, well, just go ahead and pull the time directly from the schedule or base it on the schedule. Now, when I do schedule, I have a few extra options. I can have the employee still clock in and clock out. It's called paired punching. But regardless of what time they clock in, what time they clock out, they still would never total any more hours than what they're scheduled to. So remember, this employee is actually associated to a 7 to 4 shift, basically an 8-hour shift with an hour, or a 9-hour shift with an hour for lunch, thereby giving them 8 hours. So essentially, this employee could clock in from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., but at the end of the day, they're only going to show 8 hours. The in only, I could just have the employees clocking in once per day, again, just to let me know that they were definitely there in the facility working. And then according to how many hours they were scheduled, that's what the system would pay. So again, they only need to clock in once. They would still get their 8 hours. Or maybe we have it set up so they never clock in. We do not expect salary employees to clock in and clock out, but we do want to see their hours in the time card window. So again, it's going to pull it right from the schedule. The pay overtime, typically actual, it'd be where you would activate the pay overtime. Because 9 times out of 10, you're not going to schedule overtime into any of your shifts. Therefore, you typically don't use schedule and pay overtime. So remember, there are some companies that do allow salary employees to be paid overtime. So just remember, it typically means that those employees are definitely expected to actually clock in and out, and based on those hours, the overtime is determined. So again, that's the salary side. The hourly side. On the hourly side, this is actually where we can activate, which would be the first item that I'll chat about, is the department, or what we call the level wages. If you recall yesterday, back in the main company, we talked about level wages and how you could activate that particular feature. Here, if we'd activated that particular feature, if you look in training, we did say use an hourly wage, but I did not specify a specific wage because I told you it might be different for each employee. So here, I'm saying, well, whenever Joe Sample works in training, maybe he makes $15 an hour. But whenever Joe works in, let's see, what's available, sales, maybe he makes $20 an hour. All of those are changeable just based on the department. Or customer service, maybe he makes $16 an hour. So again, depending on what's available, programming services is also available. So maybe he makes $25 when he works there. Research and development had not been activated to use the hourly wage. So again, you'll notice how it's completely grayed out. But training was activated. So this is where for every department that Joe can potentially work in, we can assign a different rate of pay to this employee. Okay. And then, of course, you may have another employee that can work in those same departments, but they make a different rate of pay than Joe makes when they work in those same departments. So that's why this is a very individualized tab. So that's your level wages. Now remember, I told you yesterday, if you're going to use the level wage, then you need to pick one level to use the level wage. You wouldn't assign a level wage to a department and a level wage to a job, because then you'd be confusing the software. When you confuse the software, it only takes the wage from the lower level, which in this case would be the job. Okay? Now, let's say we're not using level wages, and we're just using one standard wage, meaning Joe Sample, no matter where he works, he always makes the same rate of pay. That's what we call a global wage, meaning global to any labor level. I can click Add here. The date, I think we said Joe Sample actually hired on June 29th. So I would just take this back to the 29th. Now remember, if I was doing this for existing employees, I would actually use the same date that we started the schedules. Remember I told you the trigger date? I would use the same date for schedules as well as wages. In this case, we'll say that Joe Sample makes $15 an hour, and that is the wage. Again, this is a global wage, meaning it is global to any labor level that this employee can work in. Questions about the wages area? All right. At the bottom, we'll click OK here. And this brings us into the badge section. In the badges area, this is where we are officially assigning Joe Sample to a badge. So remember, yesterday I told you that every badge, as soon as you receive a badge, that badge is basically valid. So right out the packaging, you could give an employee a badge and they would be able to use it. Well, the question is, when they started using that badge, that information would basically just be stored in TA100 Pro until the employee is officially assigned the badge. And this is where we make that assignment. In this case, let's maybe say we assign Joe to badge 54. It is valid. Remember, I told you by default all badges were valid until you specifically make it invalid. So to make this badge invalid, you would simply uncheck the box. Now, what would be a reason that you would truly want to make a badge invalid? Well, let's say maybe Joe lost his badge. And we don't want someone to find the badge for Joe and just start swiping for the front of it and really just messing up all of his time and attendance. So again, that is how I would stop that, because we would go ahead and make that badge invalid, and then we would issue Joe a new badge. Now, also know badges can be reused. What if Joe Sample has decided to leave our company, but his badge number 54, is in excellent condition? Again, we simply want to delete it from being connected to Joe Sample. And once I delete it, I typically recommend that you wait one complete pay period or one complete pay cycle where that badge is not in use, and then you can, of course, reassign it. Now, what some companies will do, they will take badges and they will simply put them at the end of their current stack. So whenever that badge is back in rotation, it's probably been quite a few pay cycles. So again, I do know that clients definitely do that. Any questions about the badge assignment? All right, we'll go ahead and click Close here. And this brings us to the clock assignment. Now, if you notice all of the clocks across the top, you have the hand reader, the TA100, the TA745, and, of course, the TA785. What do all of these clocks have in common? They have some type of template that is possibly associated with them. The hand reader has a hand template. The TA7000 has a fingerprint template. The same with the 745 and the 785. They have fingerprint templates. These particular clocks must always be assigned to an employee because of the template purpose. Yesterday, when we dealt with clocks, I did share with you, because on each one of these tabs, for each one of these clocks that we looked at, there was an assignments tab because we had to assign employees. So here, for Joe Sample, it makes sense that I don't have to go back to the clock configuration window to make the assignments, because at one point, a few years ago, you did have to go back to the clock configuration assignment to make those assignments. That was the only place that assignments could be made. But doesn't it just make logical sense that if you have to add a new employee, you should be able to do that in the standard add process? So again, we have moved that feature as a part of the adding process. Now, yes, it is still in the clock configuration. It has not been removed from there because, again, when you initially set up your system for your employees or your clients, you'll want to go ahead and do the majority of those assignments initially back there. But when you add new employees, you just shouldn't have to go back to clock configuration to do that. So here, if Joe Sample is going to be assigned to, I think we created a HP 3000. Yep, there it is. And then for the 7000, I didn't create any of those, but I think we did do a few here. And he has the 745 and the 785. Notice the last column here, here for the special enrollment, it does not indicate there has been any enrollment for this particular employee. What am I looking for? I'm actually looking in this section where it says templates on file for badge numbers. If Joe Sample had been enrolled at the clock and we had successfully retrieved that template into TA100 Pro, where it says templates on file for badge numbers, you would be able to see his badge number. Badge number 00054 would be listed in this field. The same here. Templates on file for badge numbers, you would be able to see that badge number listed here if he had a successful template uploaded into the software. Now, on the hand reader, there's also another question. It says retrieve templates from. Well, suppose this particular company had maybe 3 hand readers. And maybe Joe Sample only used the hand reader that was next to the cafeteria. That was the hand reader that he used the majority of the time. Well, if I ever needed to retrieve a template for Joe Sample, wouldn't that be the best clock to retrieve the template from versus the front door or the back door because he never uses those particular clocks? Well, this allows you to make that decision. Now, in this case, it's not a valid point because we only have the one hand reader. But again, when you're working with a company that has multiple hand readers, you definitely want to associate the employee with the clock that they use the majority of the time. Because if we ever need to retrieve a template, we want to retrieve the most possible accurate template. Any questions about the clock assignment? Go ahead and close there. And guess what? We have successfully added a new employee into the system. And yep, that is exactly what I did for the last name. I'm going to just reverse that and clean that up a bit. So this is a tab that we started on, which was the Detail tab. The Clocks tab was one of the last tabs that we worked with. The Badges tab, the Wages tab, the Messages tab, the Benefits tab. Well, we didn't have anything to do here because back on Detail, all we had to do was assign the employee to a benefit. Well, now that we have assigned the employee to the benefit, we're able to see any balances that this employee may have. So this is where you can see all of the balance information. Now, from this window, if we needed to do any adjustments, you see up to the bottom where it says Details, you can click the Details window, and you can actually see how all of this information has been granted to Joe Sample over time. Because remember, he actually hired with us in 2001, and of course he did not receive his first set of 40 hours until 2002. And we talked about that in the benefit accruals window yesterday. It doesn't happen immediately. It happens the following or at the end of that cycle. And of course, the 40 hours, there is no carryover there, so he always ends up with the 40 hours. If you needed to do a manual adjustment, here is where we could do a manual adjustment of some type. You pick the date that you want to apply the adjustment to. You put in the time. I typically like to use midnight or maybe 1 a.m. And then the type of adjustment, because there are two types of adjustments. Right now, let's say the balance is listed at 40. But if I wanted to say his balance was really 60 hours, I could do that. Or if I wanted to give him extra hours, or even if I wanted to deduct hours, because you can use the negative. So really, if I wanted to say, well, you know what, he really has less than 5 hours, I could put in a -5, and that would decrease his balance to 35. So again, I always say you want to use this benefit adjustment in that initial setup, because the software is going to give you the balances that it thinks employees actually have. But let's say this was an existing employee, not someone who was just hired with the software or hired with a company. Joe Sample could actually have a balance of 17 hours. Then that's typically what you want to do here. You want to go ahead and say, as of this date, this is a balance that the employee has in place. Right? And remember, you can do manual adjustments for each of the individual pay types or categories that you have created as a benefit accrual. Same rules apply. And of course, the same with the vacation. You can also see how the hours have increased. Remember, vacation was the one that actually pays monthly. So you can see how it started at the 6.66, and then it increased to the 10 hours per month. And then it finally ended with the 13. So I think that's the last stage for this particular benefit. All right. Any questions about the Benefits tab? Right, the Status tab. Remember, this was also one of the tabs that we looked at. And remember, I told you, you always want to, in the initial setup of an employee, you want to use Edit. Anything after that that should change for that employee, you want to use Add. The Transactions tab, this is a tab that we will come back to because currently we do not have any transactions in the software to date. Transactions are just punch information. And this is a new employee. We haven't added any punches for this person. So we will be coming back to this particular screen in just a little bit. The Schedule tab. The Schedule tab is where we, when we were adding Joe Sample into the window, we had 1 week that we needed to complete. Once we completed that 1 week, remember what I told you, it's going to take that 1 week and just move it forward. It's going to roll it forward every week after that, visually for at least 3 months or 90 days. Notice that 3-month time frame actually takes us right up until, what is that, October 9th. That's when the 90 days of the 3 months are actually going to end. But up until that time, you can see all of that schedule information here. If I need to make a change or edit any of the schedule information, let's say on Friday, Joe Sample really isn't going to work 7 to 4. Maybe he's actually going to work 6 to 3. I can make that change just for that day. This is only affecting July 16th, and it's just that day. Now, if I wanted to take that forward, if I wanted to say, well, every Friday he now works 6 to 3, I could certainly check the box that says Update Forward, click Apply, and now every Friday, starting from that week, he's going to be working the 6 to 3. So all of that is indeed a possibility. The Copy feature, the Rotate feature. Copy means, one, we must create a template. So if I take this week, and I'm just going to switch this back to 7 o'clock, I'm going to update forward so it now everything goes back to 7 to 4. So this 7 to 4 template that I've created, or this 7 to 4 shift, I can take that and create a template. Yeah, we're going to use employee number 6, and I'll just call it a training template. And now what that means, because I have that template created, let's say I want to give Peter Baines that same schedule. Notice Peter Baines typically works 3 to 11. Well, if on this same week, the week of the 11th, I want to copy Joe's sample schedule to Peter Baines, I can click Copy here. This is a template. This is the only template that we have, the training template that we just created from employee number 6, which is Joe Sample. And I can tell it what to copy, the shift information, the work time, the work boxes, shall I say, the days that he's definitely scheduled to work, the department codes, as well as the job codes. Copy from selected employee. The copy from, that's going to be Joe Sample. And I'm going to start that, we said, the week of the 11th. And then I'm only going to keep it for 1 week, so that'll be until the 17th. Now remember, I could do a copy forever, but that's not what we want to do. And then copy to selected employee, that's going to be Peter Baines. And we're going to start that also on the 11th. So do know, I don't necessarily have to have them working the same week with the same shift. Maybe it's starting the week of the 18th that I want Peter Baines to have the same schedule as Joe Sample did for the week of the 11th. All of that's a possibility because you are controlling those dates. Here, I'll click OK. And just like magic, notice now Peter Baines has the same schedule that Joe Sample does for the week of July 11th through the 17th. So that is what we consider a copy. Now, rotate. And actually, Peter Baines is a good employee to show a rotate with, because notice his original schedule was the 3 to 11. Well, what if Peter Baines actually works both shifts? 1 week he works 7 to 4. The next week he works 3 to 11. That's a great rotation. If I click Rotate here, I'm going to check the box to activate the rotating schedule. But the first thing that I have to do is define the rotation time frame. Here I'm going to define it starting on July 11th. It's going to consist of 14 days because it's 1 week is 7 to 4 and the next week is 3 to 11. And what day am I going to start the rotation? Well, that's going to start the 25th because remember, the week of the 11th has been defined as 7 to 4. The week of the 18th has been defined as 3 to 11. So starting on the 25th, I wanted to go back to 7 to 4. Include the job costing information, which is the department and the job code. Absolutely. So we'll click OK here. And now when I move forward to the week of the 25th, it should be a reflection of 7 to 4. There it is. The week after that, you go back to 3 to 11. The next week, 7 to 4. 3 to 11, 7 to 4. Perfect. That is what we call a rotation. So it's all about what you need to actually put in place for your employees. Any questions about this particular rule? All right. Take us back to Joe Sample. And the other item I promised you I would chat about in the scheduling window is what we refer to as a shift override. A shift override is where an employee may work a specific shift on a day, but the shift is not officially built or it's not a part of any shift group that we have in the software. So again, I'll pick on Friday. Let's say I want this employee to actually work from 5 to maybe 2 p.m. That's a shift override. It's a shift that I created right on the fly to attach to Joe Sample. We didn't have a 5 o'clock shift, so I wanted to build a 5 o'clock shift. And I built it right here. So that's why I literally said shift override. So whatever rounding rules were associated to this employee, they now apply to the 5 o'clock shift. Because remember, we could have had, and I think we did have a round or dock or grace. So now those rules actually apply to this particular shift because that's the shift that we have created. Any questions about schedules? And a multiple miscellaneous, I'm actually going to hold that until we get to the time card because it is a transaction, and I prefer to do all transactions from the time card window. But delete, I don't recommend that you delete schedules. Remember, if you delete a schedule, that means you're deleting all of the rounding rules, all of the auto or break lunch deductions that you have, and of course, if you have differentials, you're removing all of those rules because that's really the purpose of assigning an employee to a shift if you need any of those 3 items to occur. All right. The last tab over is, of course, our time card tab. In the time card window, you'll notice here it actually starts with our red information only because this window has been processed. You notice auto processing was already activated. So as soon as we arrived in the time card window, it gave us proper or correct information. This pay cycle actually started the 11th and will end on the 17th. So it's exactly 1 week. So we're looking at a week's worth of information for good old Joe Sample here. Also across the top, do you see the department label? It is actually a toggle. If I click it, it'll switch from department to job, department to job. So that's a good piece of information. Right now, though, in the time card window, because Joe Sample was officially scheduled to work Monday through Friday, and of course, Joe Sample failed to show up. He did not clock in. He did not clock out. Therefore, he is actually listed as absent. So again, you can see the red information coded with the letter A. It is a representation of absent information. So before we get started sharing with you how to add information into this time card to clean up this time card, because typically that would be what a supervisor would probably be working on right about now. It's Friday. The pay cycle actually ends on Sunday, but this employee doesn't work on Saturday and Sunday. So we want to look at cleaning all of this up for this particular employee. To the middle of the screen, where it starts with the auto processing, remember, auto processing is definitely something that you want to keep activated. What's the purpose of auto processing? It allows the screen to automatically update anytime you make a change in the window. So you add a punch, you typically expect to see that updated immediately. Auto processing allows that to happen. In the event that for some reason maybe you have inactivated auto processing, You can manually reprocess the screen by clicking Reprocess to the bottom here. So notice you can always manually reprocess anything that you're working in just by clicking the button here. Next door to auto processing, you have Show Schedule. Well, remember, we did assign Joe Sample to a specific schedule. Now, if we want to see what he was supposed to work on all of these days that he's coming across absent, if we want to see what he was supposed to work, then we can click Show Schedule. And in the Start and column, or Start and Stop column, you can actually see his official schedule time. So remember, all of this information is actually being pulled right from the schedule. So that's what he was scheduled to work. Also, one other thing to consider, in the time card window, the absent pieces of information, they're being defined as absent because you officially scheduled this employee to work on those days. If we had not checked those work boxes, then you would not see absent information. So again, that is something that you may want to make sure your clients understand. If you want to be able to track absences, then you have to tell the system exactly which days an employee is scheduled to work. If we don't know when they're scheduled to work, then we certainly can indicate that they are absent. The forecasting information. I can have the software forecast out for us, which means it should forecast out one day because this pay cycle actually ends the 17th, and this employee only had one other scheduled day to work, which would be the 16th. So here, if I click Forecasting, I will need to reprocess manually because I literally needed to take a second to look at that Schedule tab. And now that it does that, it populates the information. Notice this, though. Do you see the time that it puts in? Remember, that's the new time. That shift override that we created, that's the new shift for Friday. So that's exactly what it's forecasting out for you. Forecasting information will always appear in blue, and it will be coded with the letter F for forecasting. The approval. As a manager, supervisor, you can actually approve time. Now, one thing you need to understand about the approval is a visual approval. I point that out because ultimately it does not carry any major weight. If I click Approve here, click OK, notice the time card is approved. Now, when you look at this time card, is this really a time card that you would have approved? It's only absent information and forecasted information. Probably not. But again, it's a visual approval. It's holding the person responsible. Whoever clicked Approve, it's holding that particular person responsible for making sure that the information is correct. So that's why I say it is a visual approval. To the right of that, where it says Pay Periods Back, it's currently resting on 0. You need to understand that 0 will always represent the current pay period. That's what 0 represents. If you want to see previous pay period information, you can use the up arrow, and it will simply take you back to the previous pay cycle. And you can just go back. So that is indeed what it does. Now, another way that you can also manipulate your pay cycles, you see the double set of arrows up by the letter S here? It also has a counterpart right below that, or down by the word key, just to the right of the word key. And this also allows you to manipulate your pay cycles, the double arrows here. And speaking of the word key, if you take your mouse and you just kind of hover over the word key, it's a pop-up. It's a pop-up that allows you to see exactly the definition of your color code items. So if you can't remember what red signifies or blue signifies, again, just go to your key. There are going to be some other colors that you'll see in the software, such as the purple for a missing punch, the green for in right now, the gray for future transactions. The only color that you will not see, at least for training purposes today, will be the pink. Remember when we created the policy, or we were looking at policies, there was something that was called a default total that you could input for employees, and that's actually what comes across in pink. In other words, if the employee clocked in but failed to clock out, we could tell the software to go ahead and give that employee a default total. But we did not activate that per the policy, so we will never see any pink information. But all of the other colors, certainly I expect for you to see. In fact, you've already been introduced to the red for absent, and you've already been introduced to the blue for forecasting. Here, I'll take a moment just to clean this up just a bit. So we'll go ahead and unapprove this. We'll go ahead and turn off forecasting, and we'll go ahead and remove the show schedule. Now, it just depends on your client's comfort level for the show schedule. I know some clients in the beginning, this really confuses them because they look at this as though it's real or actual work time, and it is not. It is still in red, so that means it is still absent information. But again, to a new client, it does get a little bit confusing. So I typically have them turn that off until they are very comfortable with the software. The bottom row. I normally refer to the bottom row as your action row. The top row here, everything about this was pretty much visual, what you could actually see in the window. But the bottom row is where we begin to add true punch information into the time card for this employee. So here, we already talked about the reprocess. What about add transactions? Add transactions will allow us to add any possible transaction to this employee's time card that we require. If I click Add Trans, because I'm already highlighted on, what is that, Monday, July 12th. If I click Add Trans here, notice what it does. The date and the time are all connected to the actual date that was listed here of the row that I had highlighted. The time, of course, should look familiar. Remember, we assigned Joe Sample to a schedule that was 7 a.m. So it automatically picks up things that were already associated with Joe Sample. But do know you can certainly change the date. You can change the time. You have full control of that. One thing to know, you can always do a right-click. For example, if I do a right-click in the date, it gives me a calendar that I can actually manipulate. At the time, if you do a right-click in hours, again, you get hours. If you do minutes, you get minutes. Seconds, you get seconds. But again, you can always use the little up and down arrows, and of course, you can key in anything you so desire. To the right of that, for the function, when you click the drop-down, these are all of the possible functions that you have created based on the clock. Remember, all of these functions are coming directly from this clock, and that's why you have the clock window here. So depending on what clock you select, you see functions that you've created based on that clock. In other words, how did you set that clock up? Whatever you set that clock up or you enforce that clock to do, then those are the functions that are available to you. Again, these are all the functions that are actually available to us. We can clock in, we can clock out, we can do miscellaneous entries, we have tips that we've activated, we can clock them in and out for lunch, and we can transfer departments. In this example, let's make this a miscellaneous entry. The clock, I already talked about that, but when you're creating a transaction manually for an employee, the purpose of the clock, I always like to say, you want to associate that employee to the clock that they would typically use. For training today, I'm going to just let everything go to the demo clock. The override round. Remember the rounding rules that we had in place. If we needed to override the rounding rule for some specific reason, this is where we could do so. Now, when I say override round, I'm referring to, remember that the rule that we created yesterday? I think it was all of our punches essentially round to the nearest 15 minutes. Well, maybe I don't want to punch to round to the nearest 15 minutes. I want it to be displayed as actual time. Again, that's where you can make it happen using override rounds. In the miscellaneous window, notice we do have this new window only because we selected miscellaneous from the function. In the miscellaneous window, this is where I can define what I'm actually going to pay to this employee. So maybe on this Monday, maybe this employee actually had jury duty. If this person had jury duty on that day, I can actually locate jury from within our miscellaneous entries, There's jury. It is going to be an addition because we are adding that into the employee's time. We're not subtracting it. Now, you could do a subtraction, though. And then for hours and minutes, I'm just going to make that 8 hours. Do know that field is input using hours and minutes. It is not input using decimal format. Now, just to the right of that, you can actually see it in decimal format. So literally, if this employee was 8 hours and 30 minutes, you'll know how it switches it to 8.50. All right. Once you've decided you're going to pay the employee 8 hours of jury duty, well, the question just to the right of that is, does jury duty accrue towards overtime? Some companies have certain rules that say the only time that accrues towards overtime is work time. So, of course, you would not check the box. But if the company that you're dealing with actually allows jury duty to accrue towards overtime, then simply check the box here. Differential. For companies that pay differential, they can certainly decide if jury duty, if somebody, let's say Joe Sample works on a shift that he always receives differential. Well, when he takes jury duty, does he receive differential that day? Again, depends on the company. Some companies say differential is only paid according to the hours that you work. They're not paid for vacation. They're not paid for jury duty, holiday, or any of those extras. But again, it just depends. The level. This is actually where you can change the employee labor level. Notice right now up top, Joe Sample is actually assigned to Department 5, and I want to say Job 1. But if we wanted to say, well, on a Monday, this particular transaction that we are paying for jury duty should not be associated with the Department of Training, should not be associated with the job of TA100 Pro, this is where we could change it. And again, I'm not going to change it for training purposes, but again, it could be changed. We'll close there, and at the bottom, we'll click OK here. And you'll notice on the Monday, in July 12th, we have our 8 hours of jury duty. Jury is listed as the category. Every transaction that you create will always have a start time. Remember, we don't necessarily need a stop time because we issue this employee a lump sum of hours, but it is a transaction, and every transaction will always have a start time. Any questions about that transaction? Well, we'll go to Tuesday, and on Tuesday where it says Edit/Add Start, we'll click that. Notice it's still the transaction detail window. So that's why I said you definitely want to become familiar with this window. In this transaction, all I want to do is just clock Joe in on Tuesday. Here, notice because we highlighted Tuesday, the date is still correct. The time is definitely correct, although I'm going to just change it to about 10. He was a little late that day. We'll keep it as a clocked in. I'll keep it associated with the demo clock. The override round, already told you about that particular override, but the override automatic lunches and breaks. Remember, if we had created, and I think we did in the shift that we created and that we assigned to Joe Sample, in that shift there is an automatic lunch deduction, I believe, after 5 or 6 hours. If we needed to override that, maybe that employee really didn't take lunch that day, this is where we could override the lunch. We don't have any break deductions, but certainly if we wanted to override the lunch, here is where you could make it happen. But for now, all I want to do is just clock Joe in at 7:10. And now take a look at Tuesday. Tuesday is now coming across in purple. Remember, purple with a code of M. Just in case you can't remember, if you go back to your key, it is going to tell you that purple is the code of a missing punch. And M, of course, for missing. So on this day, employee clocked in, but employee did not clock out. So in order to clock this employee out, we're just going to go to the next button here. It says Edit/Add Stop. We can click that. And notice the difference here. The date is still the 13th. That's the row that we highlighted. But because we clicked the Stop key, Notice the time is actually a stop time, 1600. Also notice the function. The function is now catering to a clock out. Again, we chose the stop time. The clock, I told you I was going to let all of my items just go to the first clock. The override round, not a new feature, but we do have the override punch link back time. Remember yesterday in the policy where I was telling you about the split shifts and if we needed one set of shifts to link back to another set of shifts? I think the example I gave was the employee works 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then they come back and they work 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. If you need those shifts to link together, again, or maybe you don't need those shifts to link together, you can override the link back time. Here, we did not create any link back time, so in this particular case, you don't have to worry about that. But also note, if the company that you're working with, one, they don't have daily overtime rules, it's not typically an issue. In this case, we'll go ahead and click OK here. And in just a moment, you'll see Tuesday is a done deal. Now, one thing to consider when you look at the total hours on Tuesday, it comes to 7.75, although this employee actually clocked in at 7:10. Remember, we have rounding rules that take effect. If we want to know exactly where 7:10 was rounded, on your keyboard, all you have to do is to press the R key, and it displays your information in rounded format. You'll notice the start and stop are now in bold, and that's your cue to let you know that you're looking at rounded format. So what was 7:10 actually rounded to 7:15, whereby that's how we lost that quarter of an hour. All right. Here, to remove that, same rules apply, just to press the R key, and it goes back to regular time. Now, if we wanted to, let's say we wanted to give this employee credit for clocking in at 7:10. In other words, we did not want the rounding rule to round it to 7:15. Remember, you did have something that talks about an override round. So 7:10 is in the start column, so that means we're going to do an edit on the start. And here, we can just click the button that says override round. Click OK here, because notice how it turns it blue. Click OK here. And now notice the difference in the hours. It has increased from 7.75 to 7.83. Now if I depress my R key again, back in rounded format, 7:10 is no longer rounding to 7:15. It is all being paid as actual time. Okay. I'll go ahead and remove the rounded format. Perfect. On a Wednesday, I want to show you another way that you can potentially clock an employee in. On Wednesday, I can go right into the start column here, and I can double-click. When you double-click, and you'll know when you have, because it brings up a little yellow transaction window. Now, I call this an in-sale transaction. You can only control two things from this particular window, and that is the date and the time. That's it. So we can't do any overrides. We can't change the function. None of that. It's just a quick way. If you have someone that has a missing punch, it's a quick way just to clean all of that information up. So I'll do that, and then here we'll go ahead and make that 1600. Again, just a very, very quick way. Now, what if after we do that we realize, well, oh, this employee, they were really busy that day, and he didn't actually take a lunch that day. We can do an override for the lunch. So here under Edit/Add Start, I can do override automatic lunches and breaks. So that 1 hour that's coming across as unpaid, that's lunch. So we're saying, hey, they really didn't take a lunch that day. They worked right through it. So I'm going to override that, basically removing it. When I do remove it from the unpaid column, notice where it drops into. It drops directly into OT1. You may remember from yesterday, we had a rule as a part of our policy, an overtime rule, that says any hours over 8 drop into OT1. Any hours, I believe, over 12 drop into OT2. The next item to the bottom is multiple miscellaneous. Multiple miscellaneous is a nice feature that actually allows you to give an employee time for multiple days. Let's take the jury duty that we paid out on Monday. Suppose that employee was gone for 5 days of jury duty. You wouldn't want to have to go back and do each one of those days individually. Well, you could use multiple miscellaneous. Well, the same with something like vacation. If they're going to take a week of vacation, you don't want to have to do each of the days individually. You can just do them using multiple miscellaneous. So here, if I click multiple miscellaneous, the time, I'm just going to go ahead and make that 7 a.m. because that's the standard time that this employee starts work. For vacation, that's going to be the category that I'll use. It is an add. The hours, I'm going to make that for 8 hours. Accrue towards overtime. Vacation does not accrue. It's not connected to a differential, and I'm not changing the labor level. Now all I want to do is on the 16th, I want to make that a vacation day. And then somewhere around the 28th, the 29th, and the 30th, they're also going to take a few more vacation days. And remember, any day that I select is actually going to pay out 8 hours per each day. Now, once I have the days selected, I can click Apply, especially if I know he has some other days in another month. Maybe in August he has some other days that we need to address. Remember, I need to apply the days in July before I move the calendar to August. So I'll click Apply here. I go back up top, switch it over to August, and then I can actually say August 2nd. And now if I'm completely done, meaning I have no other months to address, I can go ahead and click OK, or I could click Apply and then OK. But again, if I don't have any other months, I typically just go ahead and click OK. And in just a moment, you will see all of those items appear. Now, notice what's happening here. Friday, the vacation is actually in black. All of the other vacation days, including August 2nd, are in gray. Well, remember your key. Your key says that gray items represent future transactions. And that's exactly what this is. It is a future transaction. All of these things are outside of the current pay period. This pay period ends on the 17th. All of these transactions from the 28th, the 29th, the 30th, August 2nd, those are after the 17th. So they, of course, would appear in gray. Any questions about multiple miscellaneous? So remember, multiple miscellaneous was the one item that was actually a part of the scheduling window. Notice that's the same window. Here, because we did do vacation on the 16th, you can actually see it apply in the schedule itself. We did the vacation on the 28th, the 29th, the 30th, and of course we did it on August 2nd. So it does actually display that information for you, which is why some people will like to do it from this window. But again, I prefer to do it from the time card window, and it still gives you the same end result as a part of the schedule. Now, the from schedule. From schedule is a very nice feature. In fact, I'm going to go back to the previous pay period to use it. What if on Friday, July 9th, this employee actually worked their true schedule? Well, I can actually add their start and stop time directly from schedule with one click. So here I've highlighted this absent row. I've clicked from schedule, and it's automatically populated it for me, just as if I added that work time completely. That's the beauty of from schedule. In fact, I could do the same thing on a Wednesday. It literally just takes it right from their schedule, and it populates the correct information. I'll take us back. And then, of course, the delete. If you're going to delete something out of the system, remember, you can highlight the item. So let's say that we were going to highlight, maybe they're not going to take vacation on Wednesday the 28th. I can highlight this item. I can click delete. Notice it's a simple confirmation. It says, well, exactly what do you want to have removed? I can click here, and it just goes away. Now, let's say we did that on Tuesday the 13th. If I click delete here, it's a tad different. It's not a simple confirmation. I now have two transactions. So it's asking me, well, which exactly are you trying to remove? Are you trying to remove the start time, or are you trying to remove the stop time? In this example, let's say I was just removing the stop time. And of course, that sends us back to a missing punch. Because again, you move the stop time. The last item that I wanted to share with you was a change. In fact, I'll go back to the previous pay period. We'll take Friday. On Friday, what if an employee actually needed to transfer, but they failed to transfer for themselves at the clock, and now you needed to do the transfer for them? Maybe they switched departments at 10 o'clock. So here on Friday, I can do an add trans. The time now is for 10 a.m. The function, if you remember, was something that said enter department. I can go here, switch that department. I'm just going to make it Department 2. Click OK. Click OK here. And notice it gives us a new row. So 7 to 10, that employee was in Department 5. From 10 to 4, they were in Department 2. So transfers are definitely easy to complete in the software. Again, the goal is, yes, we expect the employee to do it, but in the event that they do not, the manager or the supervisor can always go back and do it for them. Any questions about the time card tab? I tried to give you logical things that you can expect your end user would need to do for employees. Well, the last tab I promised you we would look at was the Transactions tab. Remember, the Transactions tab is just that. Its primary goal is all about transactions. In other words, show me all of the independent transactions. It doesn't link in punches to out punches, doesn't do anything like that. It's all about the individual punch. It will give you everything that you need to know. Prime example, the very last column, the badge column. Notice there are no badge numbers connected to any of those transactions. The reason for that, all of these transactions were manual entries by the system operator. Everything that we did here was done by me, the system operator. If the employee had actually clocked in for themselves, you would see their badge number listed here. So it's a dead giveaway to know if the employee did it for himself or did someone go back and do it for them. Also on the transaction screen, you can still do an add, edit, and delete. I'm not a big fan of working directly from the transaction screen because something you need to remember, the information that you see in the transaction screen is not processed information. It's basically raw data. That's what it is. So remember yesterday in the policy section we talked about, I think it was the duplicate and opposing punch keys. Well, if an employee clocks in and then maybe they turn around and they clock in again, well, we told the system to put a 2-minute duplicate. So when you look at the time card, you're only going to see one of those punches. Well, in the transactions window, it's actually going to share both of those punches with you. Because remember, it's just raw processed information. Again, that's one reason why I'm not a fan of working from this. I like to look at this screen for verification of a few things, and especially when it comes to the order. For example, when I look at this and I see in, out, in, inter-department, out, oh, they did a transfer that day. But when I see in, out, that's a problem. I shouldn't see an in, out. I should at least see an in, out, and that's not what I'm seeing. So I know something's not quite right with that particular day. Any questions about anything that we have addressed in the Configure Employee section, because ultimately this is where your end user will spend the majority of their time. There really is just no way around this section. All right, we'll go ahead and close here. And it is about 9:34, so we will go ahead. I believe this is the exact time that we took our first break yesterday. We will go ahead and take our first break of the day here. We will make that a 10-minute break, so same rules apply. I'm simply going to put you guys on hold. I ask that you just put me on hold or place your phone on mute, what have you. But again, I'm not discontinuing the GoToMeeting, or I'm not logging out. Again, just putting you on hold for 10 minutes. So my clock reads about 9:35. I will be back at 9:45. Thank you so much. With me. Before we actually start, I guess, the downside of our training now, any questions, comments, concerns about anything that we have previously discussed in training session 2? All right, then we are actually headed back into daily operations, and we're going to start with the approval editor. If you notice, when I originally went into daily operations, I did not start with the approval editor, because the purpose of the approval editor is to share with you what I refer to as all of your problem employees. But when it shares with you a problem employee, you kind of have to know what to do with that problem employee from this section. So here, when we open the window, if I click absences, you can see a list of all of the employees that have absent days. If I click missing, you can see Joe Sample has 1 missing punch. Or if I click all, you can see a combination of all of that information. Now, in the bottom right corner where it says show count totals, I like to have that box checked, because if I open the window and I start on absences, I can still immediately see how many missing is. I can still see how many absences. So that's why I like to check that particular box. But again, the beauty here, you can see your problems and you can immediately handle your problems. For the missing punch, I have one of two ways I can do this. I can actually double-click the link here, or I can highlight it and then click Edit at the bottom. But either way, it's going to bring me back into the time card for that prospective employee. It's going to bring me to the pay cycle that has the missing punch that is in question. So here we are on Tuesday, July 13th. I'm going to go ahead and add the stop time here. Click OK here, or close here. And notice the missing punch is no more, because once you correct the item, it removes it from the approval editor. And that's the great thing about the approval editor. So for all of your clients, their managers, their supervisors, this is definitely the first place that I recommend they start their day, reviewing their problem employees and quickly making the necessary edits and corrections. In the approval editor, you can also view it based on groups as well as based on divisions. Go ahead and close there. Take us back to daily operations. And then, of course, you have the status board. Now, one thing that I didn't do, so I'm just going to go back to the employee section. I left that date open and available, and I still didn't officially clock Joe Sample in. Well, here on today, what we're going to do is go ahead and clock Joe in, which actually shared with you that last color code there, which was the green. Remember, green is a representation of in right now. So that's what we did. So that also means when I go back to daily operations and go to the status board, you should find that Joe Sample is actually listed as working. So we can see all of our employees that are not working, all of our employees that are working. If an employee is out to lunch or break, you'll be able to see that as well. Do know, though, this window is only as current as the last time the physical clocks were actually communicated with. Now, of course, anything that a manager or a supervisor has manually done into the software is there automatically. But all of your other punches that are coming from the clock, that information is only as current as the last time it polled. Same rules apply. You can view this window according to specific groups as well as according to specific divisions. Also under daily operations, you have the task organizer. The task organizer is a window that says, I'm going to group everything together that you'll ever really need to use in TA100 Pro. So I always refer to it as a customer service location, because if you're working with clients and they just get a little lost in the system, I assure you, if they can just remember to come to the task organizer, they'll have access to everything they need. And then we also set it up in such a format that it defines the time frames that we recommend that they do certain items. So there is a section that controls all of the things that we recommend they do on a daily basis, and you can see those items listed here. Things we recommend on a monthly basis, things we recommend on an annual basis, because remember, one of the things that I mentioned yesterday, the holidays do not roll over. The client is responsible for adding the holidays into the software. The payroll task, so at the end of the pay cycle, this actually gives them a guide of everything that they want to do to process payroll and an effort to get that export file all ready to go. And then system setup, actually where we started our training yesterday under the system setup menu. So again, everything that you really need to know and do in the software can all be found from the task organizer. It's basically a shortcut to everything you really need to do in the system. Take us back to daily operations and under global. There are two global options that can be managed here. One is the message assignment. So remember when we talked about messages and I said those were personal messages such as happy birthday or Joe Sample's name. What if you wanted to send a message to all of your employees and you wanted the message to be the same message, maybe meeting at 2 p.m.? You could do an add all, and you could also base it on specific groups or divisions, whichever you needed to do. Here, I just moved over all of the employees. I could click details and move over all of the clocks. I can remove the default message, and then here I may say meeting at 2 p.m. Click OK here, click OK here, close. If I go back into the employee section, you will find that on all of the messages for each employee, that is the same message, meeting at 2 p.m. Now remember, that process is not complete. If I want the employees to be able to view that message, I would need to go back into the polling section, do a manual poll to upload those messages. Because if I don't do that second step, they'll never see those new messages at the clock. The other global option that you have is transactions. So think of everything that we were able to do for Joe Sample. We clocked him in, we clocked him out, we gave him vacation time, jury duty time. Anything that I can do for one employee, I also have the opportunity to do it for multiple employees. So here I'm just going to move all of the employees over, click punch, and doesn't this screen look familiar? It's the same transaction detail window that we've been working with all day. So here we could click a clock in if I needed to clock employees in. Maybe for whatever reason, maybe the clock wasn't working and our employees were unable to clock in. So we had to go back and clock all of the employees in. Or maybe there was some type of an emergency and everybody had to quickly evacuate the building. Nobody had time to clock out. I could actually go back in and clock everyone out if I needed to. Or maybe in this example, we actually are treating our employees to brunch on Saturday. And we want to pay all of our employees at least 2 hours of work time for coming out and joining us on Saturday. Let me just change the date to Saturday the 17th. It is work time. It is set at regular. I will allow it to accrue towards overtime. There's no differential. And I am not changing the labor level. At the bottom, all I have to do is click OK here, click OK here, close here. If we go back to the employee section, every employee should now have 2 hours of work time on Saturday. There it is. And good old Joe has it right there. Every employee has the 2 hours of work time because that's a global. So we'll apply that to all employees. And of course, you can certainly pick and choose the employees. You may decide to associate that. I just did indeed associate it to all employees. But your manager, the supervisor, definitely has control over deciding who should be included in that transaction. Any questions about daily operations? Because ultimately, that is where your end user will spend the majority of their time. And from daily operations, the majority of the time will be spent in the employee section. All right, that means we're now headed over to reports. In the report section, you can clearly see that there are several different types of reports. Again, period reports, weekly, daily, payroll, listings. Now, location is not a type of report, but it literally allows you to switch a specific report. In other words, you could take a report from weekly reports and you can move it to period reports. So that is a location change. Now, the good news is you can pick any one of those listings or types of reports to open, and it brings you to your standard reports window. In the standard reports window, remember the location? This is the location link. So let's take the time card report. If I said location, I could actually switch the time card report to weekly, daily, payroll, exports, listing. I could switch it to any one of those other types of reports because right now the time card report is a part of period. I'm saying, well, take it out of period and place it someplace else. That is what we call a location change. Now, when you open this window, if you look to the left side, these are all of the items that you initially saw earlier. Again, when we click reports, all the things you saw earlier. Well, what happens is if you click period, let's say we click period, to the right side, these are all of the specific reports that are connected to period. If I click weekly, these are all of the reports that are connected to weekly. If I click daily, these are all of the reports that are connected to daily. Now, because a lot of people get caught up in period, weekly, daily. We're simply saying these are the reports that we'd recommend you run on a daily basis. These are the reports that we'd recommend you may want to run on a weekly basis. These are the reports that you may want to run on a pay cycle basis. But the end user is always in control of the time frame that any of their reports cover. The export. Remember yesterday in the main company where we assigned the prime pay export to this particular database. Notice you only see the prime pay export here. You don't see a list of all of those other exports. That was the one item that I activated yesterday because I didn't want the client to see all of those other items. So I simply said display only the prime pay export. Listings. Now, listing reports are different than any of these other reports. Listing reports don't display employee information, meaning like hours, in punches, out punches, total hours. That's not their purpose. Their purpose is to tell you about anything that has been configured in the software. So, prime example, you want a list of departments. That's a listing report. Or you want a list of all of the holidays that you've built in the software. You want a list of all of the policies that we've configured in the software. That's all about listing. Anything that we have set up in the software, that's what this is. A birthday list, because remember, you could indeed include birthdays in the software. Again, you can pull the birthday list report, but you've got to have birthdays in the system. A division list, a group code list, all of that is a possibility. Because again, it's all about what you've created in the software. Here, if you go back to period, something you should have noticed to the bottom, you can run these reports based on two parameter screens, either using ranges or using individuals. It's just those two. That's it. So that means you could run any report, period, weekly, daily, even the exports, because you only have those two parameter screens. So to me, that's the beauty of the report section. You can run any report once you understand these two parameter screens. So we're going to start with ranges. At the bottom, we'll click Run. And this is the first parameter screen as it relates to ranges. You'll find that the window is divided into 3 sections. The first section being the time frame. So remember I mentioned earlier, you are in control of the time frame that every report that you run will cover. You have 4 options. You can base it on the pay period. And notice when you select pay period, just across from that, you get to decide which pay period. And your pay period here will run from 0, as you know 0 represents the current pay period, up to 99 pay periods back. Now, if that's not enough for you, you can always say special, and then you can input the specific start and stop dates. So if you wanted to run a report for a month, if you wanted to run a report for a year, all of that happens here. So notice as I went through all of the types of reports, not once did I say these are annual reports. We don't have any specific reports that are labeled annual reports. That's because you make it an annual report. You can take any report and turn it into an annual report. Yesterday, if you select the yesterday, remember the system knows the date, the correct date that is, so it applies it to yesterday. Today, it knows the correct date, so it applies that as well. Now right below the start and stop, you do have 2 boxes, forecasting and reprocess. Remember earlier in the time card window, we did see forecasted information. Remember we forecasted out for Friday. So this question says if you want to include forecasted information in your report, all you have to do is check this box. The reprocess, I do recommend anytime you run a report, you definitely want to make sure you are reprocessing that report. And that way you end up with the latest and the greatest totals or the best totals. Now forecasting, I'm not a huge fan of included forecasted information in a report because it is not real work information. But again, it just depends on the client's purpose for the report. The middle section, this is where you can decide if you want to just include active employees or you just want to include this report for inactive employees, or maybe you're running one of those end of the year reports and you want to include all inactive and active employees. The bottom window, this is truly the ranges area. You could tell the software, let me focus on a range of employees. Maybe you want to run a report for all of the employees that start with the last name of S. So we start with Joe Sample, we end with John Smith. Now just imagine though, there could be a range of employees in between those two. That's the purpose of a range. Or maybe you want to run a range according to department. Maybe you want to focus on research and development through training. Division, same rules. You are selecting the employees. Maybe you want the Arizona division to the California division. Or groups, maybe you want Time America production to Time America administration. All of those are a possibility. Now remember though, because there are 4 types here. When you select the first type, it's qualifying based on what you selected. So we started with all of the employees with the last name of S. And then we went to, well, those employees have to be within these departments. Well, then once we narrow that list down, then it says it has to be within this division. So they're all narrowing each other down. So it could be a possibility you may end up with no one by the time you're all done. So certainly you want to be slightly careful with how you make those selections. Here, I'll go ahead and close there, and then I'll switch it over to individuals. I'll click Run here. Notice the individual parameter screen is also divided into 3 sections. The top 2 sections just as they were for ranges. So the time frame, nothing has changed here. You can choose pay period, special, yesterday, today. All of that is still available. We'll go with pay period, and we'll keep it at the current pay period. I'm not going to include any forecasting information, but I will, of course, keep the reprocess. The employees, we are going to say active employees. Currently, the software doesn't have any inactive employees. Of course, I only have 6 employees in the system. And then here, for our employees, This is a list of all of our employees. I can move over individual employees. That's the big thing about this section. I can double-click here and move over one employee at a time. One employee at a time. Notice there is no single button that says Add, so you have to double-click the employees to move them over. I could add all of the employees just by clicking Add All, or I could base it on department. Those people who are in customer service could go over. Or I could do it based on divisions. Let's see if there's anybody in the Time America division. Could do it that way. Could do it based on groups. Let's take the training group, and you move over Joe Sample. So all of those are possibilities. In this example, let's go ahead and just add all of our employees over. To the bottom, I'll click OK. And this brings up what we call the second or the additional parameter screen. Now, the good news is, though, it doesn't matter if we were working in ranges and we had clicked OK. It's the same second or additional parameter screen. So this screen is always the second screen. Doesn't matter if you are in ranges or if you are using individuals. It is always the same screen. In the status area, all of these labels should look familiar. Remember, full-time versus part-time, permanent versus temporary. You saw these labels in the status tab. The hourly versus salary, you saw that on the wages tab. Here, I'm going to keep all of these set at both, simply because I know I don't remember what labels have been assigned to all of those other 5 employees. So to make sure we don't exclude anyone, I'll keep it at both. And the sort by, well, we are going to include all 6 of those employees. So the question is, how do you want to have them sorted? By employee number, meaning in numerical order, or would you prefer to see them in alpha order? Here, I'll keep it in alpha. The group by, I can't actually group those employees according to department. I can group them according to division, or I could group them according to groups. In this case, I'm just going to keep it a straight alpha listing, because I'm going to leave it by name, by the sort order, and so it'll just be a straight alpha listing, not by department, division, or group. And then for the output, you do have a few options here. You can send it straight to the screen, which is what we are going to do, so you can see it as well as I can see it too. We could send it to the printer, which is a hard copy. We could save it as a file, so if you wanted to take a report and turn it into a PDF, you could. We could also send it out via email. Now notice there are 2 types of email. The first email refers to another user in the system. Again, we haven't gotten to the security area yet where we add new users into the system. But when you do, there will be a field there for you to include the email address. If you do, that's what this is referencing. You can send this report to another user in the system, another manager, supervisor, someone like that. The second email is related to the employee. So you may remember earlier when we added Joe Sample into the software, there was a field for an email address for Joe Sample. If we had populated that field, we could send this report directly to Joe Sample. So again, those are the options, another user in the system or a specific employee. Again, for training today, we are going to keep it connected to the screen. I'll click OK here. It'll take a moment to process that information, and here is the end result. Again, notice across the top you have the company name. So that was one of the first things we looked at yesterday in the main company. I told you that you would always see the company name on all of your reports. The name of the report, this is a time card report, so you can see it listed here. And then, of course, it gives us all of the employees in alpha order. So we're starting with Frank Anderson. We have Peter Baines, David Jones, and there is Joe Sample. Notice Joe Sample is actually working right now. Today is Thursday, July 15th. He clocked in at 7. He is still working. Notice there are no hours for today. Tomorrow he's on vacation. Saturday, we gave him the 2 hours. Remember, that's the 2 hours for the brunch or breakfast that we're paying. I'll head over to the second page. And this is where we'll finish seeing all of the information for Joe Sample, because we can see all of his totals listed here. We also have signature lines as a part of this time card report. And then, of course, we end with John Smith and Carol Washington. But again, that is a time card report. The print preview, the toolbar that you see to the top left corner, this is how you will want to manipulate the report. Notice how I went to the next page, or if I needed to go back to the first page or the beginning, I can do that. If you needed to go to a specific page, you can do that as well. The size, or the viewable size, so if that wasn't large enough, I could, of course, increase the size. Now, the most important item here is the door. This is how you close out of the report. Now, most people will typically click this X here thinking that's going to close the print preview. Well, the only thing that does is close the print preview toolbar, but it doesn't close you out of the report. And then it means that they're stuck trying to use the X here, and at some point they tend to close out the complete software. Again, this is the best way to close out of the system, is to use the door to close the preview. I'll click that. And that just brings us back to the report area. So remember, every report works exactly the same. The daily, let's say we ran who's in. OK, screen. Yep, and there's Joe Sample because he is definitely in right now. So all of our reports essentially work exactly the same. Exports, no difference there. You still have to walk through the same parameter screen to create the export file as well. The only end result is, instead of it being a report, this is always in file format, because this is the file that, one, your end user is going to send to their payroll vendor, or two, they're going to upload it online for themselves. Click Run. I'm going to just take this back to the previous pay period, because typically when you create an export file, you have already moved into a new pay period. So the pay period that you are exporting is that immediate previous pay period. I'm going to move all of the employees over, because again, you don't want to leave anyone out, but you definitely want to make sure this is active. We don't need to include any inactive employees. And I'll keep that set at both, because again, I don't want to leave anyone out. I'll click OK here, and notice it brings up a Save As window, because remember, it's a file. Typically what I recommend to my clients is that in this window, you want to create, so in the root folder of TA100 Pro, you want to create a folder and simply label it Payroll or Payroll Export. And here I can click that folder. And now I'm going to save it. Notice how this file is indeed a DAT file. I don't want to change it from being a DAT file. But what I do want to do is actually relabel the name of the file. I typically like to label a file always with the last day of that pay cycle. So in that case, this cycle actually ended on July 10th, because remember, they're in a pay cycle that started on the 11th, so that means it would have had to have ended on the 10th. I'll click Save here, and that file has now been created. Now, what they do with the file once the file has been created, that is going to be a decision or a conversation that they will definitely need to have with their payroll vendor. Because one, like I said, they will upload it directly via the web themselves, or they will just send it as an email attachment to someone at their payroll company. All right? So again, an export, very easy to do. It's not that difficult at all. But the goal is, once that file is created and when they do upload it, if those export codes that we discussed, and I'll just remind you, if those export codes that we discussed back here in the category section, if those codes are not correct, then do know that that file will not upload properly into the payroll software. So I do encourage them, at least when we do a training or when I do a training with my clients, that one sample file that we create, I do encourage them to make contact with their payroll vendor, use that as a test file to make sure that everything is working properly. I'll just take us back to report. So essentially what I really want you to understand or make sure that you explain to your clients about reports, you can't break reports. Reports is just the way that you can see information that is available in the software. Of course, if the information is not available, it's not going to share that information with you. So you do want to keep that information, or you do want to run any report or have your clients run any report that look of interest to them. Because clearly there are so many different reports that the software has to offer. You just want to show them how to run the reports. And that's always my goal, is to show you how to use the ranges parameter screen and how to use the individuals parameter screen. Because once you understand that, you can run any report that the software has to offer. Any questions about reports? All right, we'll go ahead and close there. And that means that we're moving into the utility section. Under utilities or file, which is where you can find utilities, but in the utilities section, you'll see this list of all of these different items. I like to explain to end users that utilities are just a way to take care of your database, to make sure that your database is functioning exactly as it should. That's really the purpose of utilities. So I'm going to start with the first area here: repair databases, reindex databases, and update databases. Think of, and the good thing about all of these is that the software will typically let you know when you need to do something, such as repairing your database. If you typically run a report, and you run the same report, and you expect the information that's to the left to be to the left, information that's to the right to be to the right. Well, today when you open that report, all of the information has been switched around, or things don't look like they typically look in the software. Well, that's an indication that somehow your databases have gotten out of sync. Therefore, what you want to do is simply repair those databases, because that's what repairing a database does. It basically shifts it back into the standard format that it should be in. Now, in addition to that, there is something that's called re-indexing the databases. Now, the difference is repairing your databases does not remove or delete anything out of the system. But re-indexing, that's the purpose of re-indexing. Think today, I actually deleted a punch here or there, maybe deleted some other things. But ultimately, all of that information is still in the software. What happens is it just kind of goes into this little invisible file, and you really can't see it any longer. But it's still residing in the software, taking up space. Well, reindex says, I'm going to just clean all of those little invisible files up for you. That's the purpose of reindex. Or almost think of it as a defrag on your personal computers. Think of it as a defrag for TA100 Pro. That's the purpose of reindexing. Whether you're doing a repair databases or even a reindex, or you will find that the screen basically looks the same. I typically recommend that you move everything over when you do a reindex, because you want to reindex all of your tables, not just a few of the tables, when you have to do a reindex. Now, updating the databases. Updating the databases, again, is one of those things that the software will alert you if you need to do. Now, I can tell you when it's going to say it's mandatory. Anytime that you have upgraded to a later version of TA100 Pro, as soon as you upgrade and you go to log in again, the system is going to say, hey, do you want to compare and update your databases? You should do it. Also, if you have restored Maybe you did a backup and now you're going to restore a new database. When you restore that new database and you go to log in for the first time, same rules apply. It'll say, hey, do you want to compare and update your databases? And then if you make a change, so you noticed yesterday when we were working in the system set up in the main company, anywhere we have that table structure, like how many characters will the number be, how many characters will the department codes be, the job codes, any of those types of table structures. If we make a change there, as soon as you click OK, the software is going to say, hey, something has changed. Do you want me to go ahead and compare and update the databases? So those are the three ways that the software will alert you. Now, this item potentially is actually here for more so of my team. When we go in and we can test some things and we can play with some things, then we just want to send everything back to where it was. We just want to update the databases to make sure that everything is in good standing. So we are probably the only set of folks that would manually use and update databases. But by default, from the end user perspective, the system is always going to tell them when they may need to update the databases. Now, this next section is only going to be available to someone who is logged into the software and they are logged in as the system administrator. Only the sysop user has access to these three items. That's it. If you are not the system operator, you will not have access to these items. Why? Well, these items are critical. Initializing the database. Initializing the database, unlike repairing the database, reindexing the database, or updating the database, this is, how about I just clean out everything that's in your database completely? Let's start from new. Let's start from fresh. I do not recommend the end user to ever do such a thing unless they have communicated with you as the reseller and you have confirmed that the database is actually corrupted, or they've worked with someone here in technical support and we have confirmed that all of the information is indeed corrupt, and this is the best thing to do is just start from scratch. Then certainly we would do an initialization. Changing the employee number, changing the employee number width. If you notice earlier today in the employee section, when you keyed in the employee number, it appears as though it is carved in stone because you cannot make an edit to the employee number from the employee section. This is the only place in the software that you can change the employee number. Now, the purpose of that, and I think I mentioned it yesterday, is that the employee number is the one link that this software has back to your payroll software. So we don't want to make it easy for people to just quickly change the employee number. We want you to put some thought behind it. And therefore, only the system operator is able to change an employee number as well as change the employee number width. Remember yesterday when we started back in the main company, we had to decide how many numbers, meaning if it was a 5-digit in width, if it was 7 digits in width, how long is that employee number? All of that has to be determined up front. So let's say you were working with one company that used 4-digit numbers, and now that company has decided to increase it to a 5-digit number. Again, you'd have to go back to main company, update it to 5, and then come here and change the employee number width to 5. That means it's going to update all of the existing employee numbers in the system to 5 simply by adding that extra 0. So again, this section, a very critical section, and only allowed to be accessed by the system operator. The set reprocess date. One, you want to understand what is a reprocess date. Earlier, I talked about reprocessing, and I said anytime you make a change or you click something and you don't feel the screen has automatically updated, you can force a reprocess. But what if something was done in the past and I want to go back and reprocess from a different date? Prime example here. Let's say that I didn't have enough policies, and we had a group of employees that were not assigned to the correct policy. And this company started or went live, July 4th. So now that we have added this policy, we have gone back and we have assigned the correct employees to the policy. I can come here, put my reprocess punches starting on July 4th, move over those employees that I have assigned to that new policy, and click OK. Now, the gotcha here is, while you've done that, you still haven't reprocessed. So that means in order to force a reprocess, because I got the date all in place now, but I still need to make the actual event happen of reprocess. That's when we were in the report section, did you notice there was always the question of a reprocess? Just the question hanging out there by itself. And that's why I tell you, you always want to keep it activated. Because literally, I can reprocess the database, and I don't need an end result. Like, I don't need an output too. I just physically want to reprocess. And that's what you're doing here. So you've selected the date, and now you just want to do a manual reprocess. So those employees, maybe they were not scheduled to get holiday, but that old policy that they were connected to paid out holiday. Well, I need that holiday to disappear. So once I reprocess those punches based on that new reprocessed date, now that they have connected to the correct policy, it's going to take care of all of that for me. The fixed unassigned badges. Fixed unassigned badges is a nice place, and it is a place that people tend to forget, but I try to explain. You always want to remember to go and check it out, especially when employees say, well, you know, I have been clocking in, and yet you say you don't see any of my punches, but I'm telling you, I have been clocking in and clocking out with this badge that you gave to me. And sure enough, maybe that employee has been clocking in and out with the badge that he was given access to. But come to find out, all of the punch information from that badge has been gathering right here in unassigned badge maintenance. Why? Because when someone keyed the badge number into the employee screen, they transposed or did a typo in the employee badge number. So therefore, that wasn't the official number that was connected to the employee. So none of their punch information actually was applied to the time card. But here it is, all hanging out here in unassigned badges. So just remember, when you're working with clients and they say, well, employees keep saying they're clocking in and we don't see any of their information, come and have a look at unassigned, especially those employees that are just using the keypad to key in or, you know, pin push, because they can make mistakes as well, just pin punching in a number or just keying in a physical number. But again, when you add employee badge numbers into the system, you could have made the mistake there. So this is a great place just to kind of review maybe once a week to see what's really hanging out here. Because if anything doesn't have an official home, it is going to come into this section. Under Utilities, the post from R files, the purge R files. One, you want to understand exactly what are R files. R files are what we refer to as raw data files, raw punch files. And the interesting thing about a raw punch file is every day a new raw punch file is created, because every time you pull the clock, it creates a new R file. And typically you're going to pull the clock every day. So every day that you poll, you're creating a new R file for that day. Well, that is why we essentially say that if you need to use any of those R files, you know, maybe someone went in and just deleted a whole week's worth of information. No problem. You have the R files. You can post that information back out. Now, what it doesn't capture, though, is anything that someone manually went in and put into the system. Because remember, that didn't come from the clock. So it's only looking at raw data. That's what your R files contain. But on the other hand, because it is creating an R file every day, R files tend to stack up. They tend to stack up, meaning they're taking up a lot of memory space in the software. Therefore, you will essentially want to purge those R files. Now, systems are a lot different than they were back in the day. We have just tons and tons of memory in the software. or in the computer that it's probably residing on, because remember this is a desktop product. So purging R files isn't as important as it used to be. I have seen some clients that still have all of their R files, and they've been using the system for 3 years because the system that they're using is a very good system. It has a lot of memory, so it's not that big of a deal. But I do encourage, or just so from your perspective, you understand that when clients begin to say, well, oh, our software is running a little slow. Well, that could be one of the first things that you could do to help them out. Purge some of those old R files. And definitely go back and re-index the databases, because that's another thing that can slow a system down. All of that unnecessary information still housed in the software. Post-historical data. Post-historical data is what we consider to be the first line of archiving information. Think of it this way. In TA100 Pro, there are 2 places that you can see employees' time and attendance information. You can see it, of course, in the time card, and you can see it in the report section. Those are the 2 places, time card, report section. When you post historical data, what you're telling the software is, hey, I want to take you out of the time card, and now you only can see that information in reports. So that's what we mean by posting. We're removing it out of the time card table, so it's only a part of the report table, posting historical data. Now, once you've posted information, if you decide to archive, archive means that it is no longer in TA100 Pro. So that means now you are removing it from the report tables in the software, which means it is no longer available in TA100 Pro, because you've already posted it, which means you've removed it out of the time card. Now when you archive it, you're removing it out of reports. Therefore, it is no longer residing in TA100 Pro. Do know this, when your client, if they decide to archive information, remember they can only archive information that has been posted to historical data. So the information at least has to be more than 30 days old, because that's the earliest that you can post anything, is after it is 30 days old. Now again, same rules apply. They're making systems, computer systems, better and better every day. So I rarely have clients that have a need to post historical data or to really archive, because the software or the computer is just, it has so much memory until it can hold all of that information. Now granted, it may be a little slower, especially for clients that may have been using the system for 5 years and what have you. But as long as they re-index the databases, purge the R files, they still will be able to have all of their pertinent information still embedded in TA100 Pro. But in any event, if they do decide to archive, they can restore the archive at any time. So that's why we do have the Restore Archive available. But caveat here, you have to know where your archives are. If you archived and you put it on a CD drive, you need to know where the CD drive is. If you archive, you put it on a flash drive, you need to know where the flash drive is. If you archived and you put it on a tape drive, you want to know where the tape drive is. Whatever source you use to archive that information, in order to restore it, you have to have access to that information. I cannot tell you how many times I get calls and clients saying, well, we archived our information and now we're ready to restore. Can you go ahead and do that for us? No, I don't have your archive. You archive that. What did you do with that? You don't send that to us when you archive it. That's something that you do in your own environment. The system backup and the system restore. I encourage clients, I think the software says maybe every 30 days or once a month, but I typically encourage clients to do it every day. If you can do a backup, do it every day. If you can't do a backup every day, then certainly do it at the end of each of the pay cycles. So if the client is on a weekly pay cycle, I encourage them to back up once a week. If they are on a biweekly cycle, back up every 2 weeks. Because the goal is when something happens, we want to have a backup file available. if somebody, blows up the computer for whatever reason, we want to have the backup file available somewhere else on the network that you can just install TA100 Pro again, go get your backup, and you're back in business without a lot of downtime. A backup is definitely very easy to do. Typically, I recommend to my clients is you want to label your backup according to the date. So I like to start with the year first, so everything is definitely in true chronological order. So here, today is the 15th. And notice in the destination, I don't have to have it resting in the backup folder connected to TA100 Pro, which is resting in the C drive. It can go to any drive. I make that decision here. It can go out to any drive that I so desire. I'm going to click OK here because I am just going to keep it in this default. And you'll see it in the top right corner, just backing up everything for me, and then it's all done. If I need to use this backup file, under Utilities, the very last utility is the System Restore. I can go here, select my file, and remember, wherever you've saved the file, you do want to go back to that area. So no matter where it was saved, what drive it was connected to, you want to go back there. It just so happens mine are saved right here to this particular hard drive. So again, there it is. I would click Select, and of course I would click OK, and that would restore this particular file. Again, I don't have a need to do that. We haven't changed anything since we backed it up, so I don't necessarily have a need to restore it right now. Again, that's how easy it is to restore a file. Questions, comments, or concerns about the utilities? All right. Then we are headed into the security section itself. So under File, the very first item here is security. Now, I always like to say security has two pieces, because when we say that we are going to add a new user into the software, there are two things that we have to define. One, we want to know what type of access, meaning what will this person be able to do in the software. And then secondly, what employees will this employee have access to work with in the software. So we're going to look at the first one, is what type of access will this person have in the system. And that's what we call defining levels. The level of access that I'm going to walk us through here, let's say that it belongs to just someone who is a time card manager. So someone who is expected to make edits and corrections to the time card. The level that's already in place here is what we call a supervisor level. This supervisor level is the admin level, if you will. This is a full access level. That's what the supervisor level is in TA100 Pro. Notice you cannot change or edit the supervisor level. This is the level that comes with the software. What we're going to do is add a new level. And this is actually going to be a time card manager. It is going to be an active level because when we want to assign someone to this level of access, we will be able to do so. The set date and time. Well, this is not going to be someone who will have access to polling the clock. So again, they don't have that type of access. So to give them access to set the date and time, that would also mean that we'd have to have granted them polling access to communicate to the clocks to set the date and time, and that we will not be doing. The print list. The print list is basically a shortcut that's directly from the time card area or the employee section that will allow them to run reports. So that's always a good thing. Now, the rest of this, when you look at how it's all laid out, it's laid out exactly the way the software is laid out. So when you look up top in this top left corner, they're kind of grayed out now, but it's that same layout. It's under the File menu, Daily Operations, Reports, System Setup, Communications. Literally, I'm saying, well, in the File menu, what do I want this person to be able to do? In Daily Operations, what do I want them to be able to do? And on and on and on. Under File, where we are right now is Security. So the question is, do I want this person to have any access to security, to do what we're doing, to create or define levels, to add new users in the system, to see who else is logged into the system? Probably not this time card manager. They will not have that type of access. And then what about all the utilities that I just walked you through? Would you want a manager to have access to those items? The only one that I can possibly think of may be the fixed unassigned badges. So they would be able to see those employees who have maybe they keyed in the wrong code or what have you. They may want to see those pieces of information. The only thing I would say here may be the print setup. Why? Because let's say the printer that this manager typically uses is out of toner. So they need to switch to another printer. I want to make sure that they have access to do so. So we will give them print setup. The next tab over, this is a tab that we spent the majority of our time in today, the Daily Operations tab. So the Approval Editor, we're definitely going to give them full access there. The Employee, I want to give them access to view employees, but this is a time card manager. They don't have the responsibility of adding employees. Like we added Joe Sample into the system, time card manager is not going to do that. Or like we were able to go back. Remember I had switched his name around. I had the first name and the last name switched around. Well, we don't want this person to be able to go back and edit that type of information either. And we definitely don't want them to delete employees out of the system. But I will give them access to the Details tab, the place where I initially started the adding process, or where they can view all of those personal details, but they cannot add, edit, or delete. The time card, they definitely need full access here. This is a time card manager, so of course they're going to need to approve the time. The schedules will give them full access with the exception of delete. I don't want anyone to delete schedules. And if they need to do the schedule override, remember how we assigned Joe Sample the schedule of 5 to 2? Again, we want to give them that type of access as well. Transactions, full access there. They definitely may need to delete a transaction or two, so complete access. The status board, or excuse me, the status tab. The status tab is where they can see if the person is full-time, part-time, temporary, permanent, if they're active, inactive, and what policy they are associated to. Again here, I'm going to make that view, but I would not give a time card manager access to make any edits or additions to that window. The same with the benefits. I definitely want the manager to be able to view the employee benefits, but I don't need him to go in and do any manual adjustments. Remember how I told you earlier? I could go in and give this employee a balance or add time or deduct time from them. We don't want the manager to do that. The messages. I definitely give the time card manager access to view the messages, but I probably would not give them access to change the messages, only because they don't have access to poll or communicate with the clock. So what good is it to give them access to changing the messages if they can't download the new messages to the clock? Now, in the polling, though, I think the automated polling that we set up, I think I did tell the system to upload messages. So it is a possibility that maybe I could give them access to adding and editing messages, because I know the polling is automatically going to upload those messages. So all of that is indeed a possibility. Wages, we're not going to give this time card manager access to wages. We'll give him access to view the badge numbers, but not to make any changes to them. The clocks, we definitely want him to know which clocks employees are assigned to. The status board, that is a definite. The task organizer, nope, too much information there, kind of get confusing for the in or someone with just time card manager rights. The benefit accruals, definitely not. That's where all of our benefit accrual rules are created. This person doesn't need access to see how the benefits were created. For global, I do transactions, probably not so much messages, because remember, we didn't end up giving them access to messages here. The reports, I probably give them access to all of the reports with the exception of the payroll export. Remember, You can't break anything with reports. They can't hurt anything with reports. And even if I gave them access to the payroll export, they would run it, but would they be able to send it to the payroll company? No, because they have no idea how to do that. The system setup. This would be a section that I would say we are not going to give this time card manager any access to. Think of system setup, where we started our training yesterday, as the brains of this entire software. This is where we create all of our rules. Our regulations come from this area. We do not want to give them access to anything here. Communication, I told you that they would not have access to poll or communicate with the clocks, because typically we're going to set that up to be an automated process. So they will see the benefits or the end result of being able to poll, but they don't have the actual access themselves. And think about it this way. For someone to poll or communicate with a clock, it means that, one, they're going to need a polling key, or they will actually have the hardware key. And most managers or supervisors, you're not going, or the company is not going to buy a polling key just for that person to be able to poll the clock. At the bottom, that means that we're all done. We can click OK here. And I have created the level of access listed as time card. Right. At the bottom, I'll go ahead and close here. And now we're going to go back to File, Security, and we're going to add a new user into the system. So here, I guess I'll just add myself in. So I'll say Add. The login, we'll make it T-Akins. I'll give myself a simple password here. The supervisor badge. Remember yesterday when we discussed the clock, I explained to you then that the supervisor badge, you can now make that any badge number of your choosing depending on the type of clock that you're working with. Now, of course, the 500, 600 still look at 11 as a prefix for a supervisor badge. But the 700 series clocks, you can take any badge and make that a badge, or shall I say supervisor badge. So here I'm just going to key in any number, not that employees may actually be using those particular supervisor badges, but supervisor badge is a required field. So even though the company says, well, no, none of our supervisors will be walking up to the clock and adding information, you still must assign a supervisor badge. It is a mandatory field. This is going to be an active user of the software. The login pass-through, I mentioned this on yesterday in the main company where we could have activated the login pass-through. Well, if I activate the login pass-through, that means for this user, I need to go ahead and activate it for this user, meaning you need to input their login information so when they double-click, it already has it, and that's what allows it to just immediately bypass them keying in the user ID and the password, because it logs them in immediately without it, because you've already predefined it. And the last name, going to key that in. First name, I'll key that in. For the security level, this should look familiar. Remember the time card manager that we just created? Well, that's what I'm going to apply to myself. I will be a time card manager in the system. The startup. When I log in to the system, where do I want the system to take me? Do I want me to just stay at the main menu? Shall it take me to the approval editor, the employee section, or the task organizer? Here, let's have it take us directly to the employee section. The color quality, you want to keep that as high. The gradient background, we'll say yes. And the TA100 Pro Messenger. Think of having IM directly connected to TA100 Pro. So again, if you need to tell everybody to get out of the system, please exit system now. You can do that with TA100 Pro Messenger. My email, so remember I told you you would have an opportunity to assign email addresses to all of the users in the software, and here's where that happens. Now the next two tabs, see the tabs behind this, divisions and groups? These are the tabs that will define the employees that I, Tracy, will have access to. So remember I told you security is a two-step process. You have to define what type of access, meaning what this person can do in the system, and then you have to decide which employees this person could work with. So you decided what type of access I would have by assigning me to the time card manager. Well, now, which employees am I able to manage? That's the purpose of divisions and groups. Here, I'm not a fan of using ranges because it could be I need to connect this employee to the Arizona division and the New York division. Well, I can't do that in a range because Arizona is not connected to New York. So the best way to do it is keep it according to list. And here, I can move that employee over to Arizona, and I can still choose New York as well. In this case, I don't really want New York. I just want to keep Arizona. For the groups, here, I can move it over to list, and we're going to say that this employee has access to the group of training. So literally what I've done, I've said I will only be able to see employees that are part of the Arizona division and that are a part of training. If they don't match in both of those areas, I will not be able to see those employees. So at the bottom, all I have to do is click OK. And guess what? I have created that new user. Now, let's test that new user out. So we'll go over to File, down to Login New User, and here's where I get to key in my new login along with my password. And just like that, I'm in the system. And I have access to one employee, and that is Joe Sample. On the Detail tab, notice I can see the information, but I cannot add, edit, or delete. Clocks, I can see it, but I cannot make any changes. Badges, same rules. I can see the information, but no changes. Benefits, I can see it, but if I click Details, I cannot delete or any type of manual adjustments. The status, same rules, but transactions, I have full access to do everything I need. Schedules, full access with the exception of delete to do everything I need. And of course, the time card, we know we gave him full access here. Let's look at some other areas. Communication, we did not give them access to communication. Under System Setup, they have no access to anything there. Reports, we gave them full access with the exception of the payroll export. Daily operations, everything with the exception of Task Organizer. And under Global, they have transactions and not the message assignment. And of course, they have no access to the benefit accrual, not to configure them anyway. Under File Security, they can change their password. So if I want to change my password, I'm actually able to do that. We did not give them access to see who was logged in. Utilities, the only utility we gave them access to was the fixed unassigned badges. So if an employee is consistently saying, I've been clocking in, but yet he doesn't see any time for that employee, he can always review the fixed unassigned badges. We did also give them access to the print menu so they can switch and change whatever they need to do there. The environment. The environment is something that is truly custom to the end user, that one user themselves. So if I want to activate bells, the little bells that go ding as you get to the end of a field or whatever, I can do that. I'm not a big fan of bells, but certainly your client may be. And it's not by client. It's actually by the user at that client. So they may have two users, and one user wants to use bells and one doesn't. This is how they can customize it. The background, same rules apply. I click this background, it will allow me to change. See this blue background with the people walking across the tile floor and the clock to the right? Well, maybe I'm a fan of checkers. I want to switch it to a checker background. It will allow me to do so, and this is custom to my login. This is custom to the TA100 login, how I want to log it in. Here I can always go back to environment background, and I can switch this out. I can switch it back to the default, and it just goes back to the default. So it is, although it's not listed as a part of security, I think it really does play a big role in security, because if I know I have the checkerboard background and no one else really has the checkerboard background, If I walk in and see someone else with a checkerboard background, I'm thinking, oh, are you using my login ID? So it does kind of help with that. Also, the navigation selection. Right now, it's attached to the small toolbar, but maybe you want to increase the size, so you can switch it to a large toolbar button. But maybe that's still not good enough. I lately have been gearing to the center screen shortcut. So it puts everything right to the center of the screen that I have access to. So remember, this person doesn't, or I don't have access to polling, auto process, or the task organizer, but all of these other things I do have access to. So it gives me very quick and efficient access. I can put them to the side, so I can take those same toolbar items and make them to the side, kind of like Outlook. Or I can use them to the bottom of the screen as what we call a zoom bar, kind of borrowing from the Apple Mac environment there. Again, same toolbars, just to the bottom in zoom mode. But it's all about what that user, T. Aikens, wants to actually have in place. So I think I like the center screen, so I'm just going to switch it back to the center screen. But the environment is indeed according to the specific user. Right, I'll go ahead and log back in as a SysOps. And I am happy to say that actually concludes everything that I had to share with you in our two-part training today. Questions, comments, or concerns about everything? Oh, I do have a question. It says the questionnaire that you give it would be, yeah, absolutely. The questionnaires, in fact, I think your sales reps should have those. But if not, I can definitely send it. What I'll do is I'll send it to everyone that has registered for the training today. So everyone will be receiving the questionnaire documentation. All right? And the questionnaire, I think it is right now, it's probably running about 13 pages. So it's just a document that we send out. You know, once the sale is finalized, we'll go ahead and send the questionnaire out, and that's pretty much the next step in the process. They complete the questionnaire, basically telling us how their clients operate, or how you pay your employees, and then we'll have what we call a questionnaire review, where I literally sit on the phone and I go through that document page by page, item by item, because it is from that questionnaire that is how I am configuring the software. And remember, some things sometimes they get lost in translation. So sometimes what you can write on paper is not necessarily what you meant to say. So that's the purpose of the questionnaire. Any other questions? All right. Then again, everyone will be receiving the questionnaire. I'm making that note right now, and we'll go ahead and get that out to everyone that was officially registered. Otherwise, I'd just like to say thank you so much for taking the time and joining me for 2 days. I do know it is a big chunk of time out of your day and your work environment, but again, thank you all so very much. And I guess I should say thank you for your time and attendance. You guys have a fabulous week. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy.